Hi Aditi, welcome
Hi.
to the Sages platform.
Thank you.
Before we start on our topic today, I'll give a brief introduction of you to the audience.
Sure.
So I was reading your introduction and it is just so amazing. It's like just a completely different mixture of so many different things.
Right.
Uh, so Aditi Rao is a writer, teacher, and a potter. Aditi is the author of two full-length books of poetry, The Fingers Remember, and A King of Freedom Song. Her essays and poems have been published widely, including in Eclectica, an Asian literary journal, Four Quarters magazine, The Feminist Wire, The Indian Quarterly, Qarrtsiluni, the Black Rabbit Review, InfochangeIndia, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, the Earth Charter Initiative, the Hindu Business Line, the Ken, and the Morning Context. Aditi's work has also received national and international recognition through awards and fellowships, including the Academy Scholars Solitude Fellowship, the Hedgehog Residency, the Sangam House International Writers Residency, the Srinivas Rayaprol Prize for Poetry, the TFA Creative Writing in English Award, the Muse India, Satish Verma's Young Writer Award, and others. Passionate about peace, education, and youth, Aditi has also extensively worked in the social change sector. After over decades of pursuing pottery as a hobby, Aditi also set up her own ceramic studio in 2017 and sells her pots under brand Happy Mess Ceramics. So this is a very, very interesting and eclectic mix of
hmm
interests and work that you have here.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about your work as a writer, teacher, and potter, and how all this actually ties in together.
Sure. So I'm not always sure if it does necessarily all tie in together, and that's for me sort of the beauty of it because ever since my very first full-time job in the development sector, I knew that I would never that no matter how much I enjoyed something, if I did only that, I kind of resented it. So my writing, I've been doing writing poetry for pretty much all of my life, more seriously since probably college onwards. I'm also now working on a nonfiction book. So that's been sort of one consistent thread ever since I was 7 or 8 years old. I've been the pottery part also happened in college, and I think it became a really interesting counterpoint to writing because in the time of writing, I'm so like in my head and in words and in other people's heads. And then to kind of step away and just spend like 3 hours just doing this with your hands just kind of uses a totally different part of your brain that I think balances each other out nicely. um, I've also always been interested in teaching, in education, in facilitation. So I started out doing it in the development sector context. Then, when I did my master's of fine arts in creative writing, I did a little bit more of combining like teaching writing with working with high school youth who were dropping out, things like that. So, also thinking about how writing is so much also about learning to own your story, learning to tell your story, and therefore learning to rewrite your story. So it became like an interesting medium to think about not just sort of craft, while I do focus on the craft of writing, but also to kind of zoom out into what does storytelling enable for how you look at your life and lives of people around you. So for the last, in March this year, it'll be exactly 10 years since I started teaching creative writing out of my work living room in New Delhi and online in the last couple of years. And then that opened up like this whole other platform because I've had hundreds of people over the years from all walks of life: engineers, lawyers, journalists, doctors, students, homemakers, retired people, ambassadors, that entire breadth in the same workshop. And sitting, I've had in a workshop a 14-year-old and a 70-year-old in the same workshop. And just sort of that exchange of each person telling their story, where we're not focusing on the content in the sense of like, oh, this is your story, but we're hearing each other's stories with like great care and depth. And the kinds of communities that enabled, the kinds of friendships I saw get created there. So I think it's also like that that community aspect is sort of the outward facing part of my work, because otherwise both writing and pottery can be so solitary and so like in your own head and in your own body. And I guess that's where sort of my work meets like where other people are in their heads and in their bodies. So I think in that sense, I feel like they all for me complement each other in a really interesting way. But when people ask me like, do you think your development sector work influences your writing? I mean, to the degree that it influences the person that I am, yes. But beyond that, I don't feel the need for these like neat links that sometimes people expect me to be able to make. For me, the point is that they're all kind of different, and in being different, they complement each other well. When the core sort of that connects them, I guess, is just that I love creating things, I love creativity, and I have always thought of teaching very much as a creative act. And so for me, they're all like different ways in which creativity unfolds.
Right. But so many different things. How do you manage your time amongst all these three areas, or do you give more focus to one and then the other two are more like, when you need to kind of de-stress or
It sort of varies at different points in my life. I think pottery is definitely the one that for me it's not something that I do professionally. Like I sell a little bit, but I have decided that I'm not going to put a pressure on my pottery to kind of be lucrative. Like that's very much something I do for the joy of doing it. And then between writing and teaching, it just varies from time to time. And I think what I found is that when I need to get deep into a piece of writing, then I need to like carve out like a chunk of time, a few weeks, a month, where I'm just sort of doing that or mainly doing that, which was also sort of a gift that I discovered through writing residencies, where you're living with a bunch of other writers in a house for a month, and then you've kind of made it that this is my month to do that. So in fact, this month from the 15th, I've kind of created one for myself because I know I need to dig deep into a project. So I'm sort of leaving the city, renting an apartment elsewhere for a month, and just kind of getting into it. So I feel the need to do that periodically at certain stages of the process. Um, but for the most part, it kind of, I'm not somebody who does any of those things every day. For me, some of it will also be that if I'm able to set in the course of this week, here are the things I want to accomplish in each and do some of that. That works better for me as far as planning goes. I can't like do the everyday thing because they are all fairly time consuming once you get into one or the other.
that's
So yeah, I think in terms of time, it's just sort of jumping around. There'll be certain seasons of my life where I'm not feeling very like into writing, or there'll be certain seasons where if I'm not feeling too well because pottery is really physical, so I might, so it just kind of, it's different things at different moments.
okay, okay, got it, got it. So, the other day we were discussing about your workshops, and we exchanged some very interesting insights. So, what are the
Hmm.
kind of people who come to your
Hmm.
workshops, and do they end up then becoming a writer? I mean, what goes into somebody starting off creative writing, and what do the others come to
Right.
these workshops for?
Yeah, so that's been the most interesting thing for me to discover over these 10 years, because when I look at the way a lot of writing workshops in the world are designed, they automatically assume that everybody wants to publish. Like there's always like the last day we talk about publication. And in these 10 years, I would say not more than 15-20% of the people who've come to my workshops have been interested in publication. Some of them, like 5 years down the line, have gotten into it. But like in terms of their first draw in, that's actually fairly rare. Um, the range is so wide of who does come in, but one of the interesting groups that I always have in workshop, a little bit less so now in the online space because I think of technology, etc., but in the offline space, was women in their mid 40s to late 50s who are sort of in that phase that kids have gone to college, they've left home, suddenly they're like, oh, I used to do this thing in college and I want to reconnect with it. In some cases, their kids have sent them, having like the kid has done one workshop and then sent their mother saying, you know what, this is something you'll enjoy. There's a lot of people who are there for like mental health kind of reasons, that, you know, I want a space where I can write, like for catharsis, for processing my thoughts, feelings, etc. There'll always be a few people who are just sort of not necessarily thinking about publishing, but simply in that space of like, I've always thought I could write. I want to see if I can write a story. And I think there's a way in which just the act of writing is really exciting to people over and above publication. Or even if they don't publish, the fact that I had this story that is written and I can share with my family, or I had gone for this one really wonderful hike that went wrong, and I want to be able to tell the story of that adventure, you know. So, a lot of it is for those kinds of reasons. Also, more recently, I've started bringing together some of my work in development sector. I've worked with a lot of therapists, and so some of that work into also looking at writing as part of self-exploration, personal growth, healing, those kinds of things. So most recently, I'd done a few rounds of a residential retreat called Craft and Courage, where in the morning halves we were looking at craft of writing, and in the afternoon evenings we were looking at becoming brave enough to tell your story fully, which was a lot of narrative therapy inspired work. And then that brought a very specific kind of crowd, which was looking for both of those things at once. And I do think that the courage bit makes you a better writer. Um, but it's also clearly you're there not just to become a better writer, but also because there's something you want to explore and grow in. So it's that whole range.
Yeah. So recently, you've been working with a lot of communities or in this whole area of community building.
Mhm.
So how do you, kind of, what are your learnings from that, basically?
So yeah, this has kind of been an outgrowth of the pandemic in many ways, I think, but also it's been something that's been enabled by the pandemic that was asked for before. So I've always been a big believer in uh, peer-to-peer relationships and learning, even in my workshops. I One of my mentors when I first started doing nonprofit work through the arts used to always tell me that you have to remember that if you're doing your job right, the kids are not coming back for you; they're coming back for each other. Because you they can have for this year or 2 years, but each other they can have for life. So that's, if you're doing your job well, then you ultimately become irrelevant to their relationships. And that's been an idea that's guided my work. And in Delhi, when I started teaching the writing workshops, I definitely, like, I've had people, these were, 12-week workshops, and I've had people come back for 5 rounds of them in 4 years. So at which point you know that they're not just coming back for like the content, right? Because there's a way in which they're already familiar with parts of it at least. Um, and I've seen some really powerful friendships, not just in the context of writing, but also in the context of how people have gone on to support like each other at crucial moments in their life, grow out of those workshops. So this idea of community was always important. And people also often asked me that, well, I've done this 12-week workshop. I don't really want another workshop in my life right now, but I'd like a way to stay connected. And we had like Google groups and things, but there was no life in them beyond the workshop.
Correct.
And that's where I think the fact that everything has moved online in the last 2 years has enabled the possibilities of people staying connected in meaningful ways, where we didn't use, you know, I mean, just the fact that we all are constantly on Zoom now, with its downsides, has also opened up the possibility of like an ongoing conversation, even when people move cities, countries, etc. So I also think that because we've all been isolated, we've all craved community more than usual. So, about 6 months ago, I started working on developing something that has grown into what we're calling the Make Space, which is a community for creatives across specific disciplines. And so far, we have about 150, 200 people who've joined. And within that, we're also creating channels. And the main community is a free space for where we're encouraging different types of interactions, free workshops, talks, etc. And then the channels are for people who also are looking at it as a learning space. So I'm leading the first, which is a writing channel. So where the goal is that it's not the intensity of a workshop where you have a prompt every week and an assignment and a reading and all of that. And yet it's sort of an ongoing way in which to also hold yourselves accountable, because that's one of the things I find that in a learning teaching context, the beauty of a community is that if you're doing a course by yourself, I mean, how many of us have signed up for courses and then dropped off halfway? You're much more likely to continue if you've made connections with other people.
True.
So just really, I think we're all really learning about the possibilities of the online right now. And a lot of people, for instance, thought that, oh, what's the value of different people from their own homes writing together on Zoom? Turns out it's actually really valuable for a lot of people. Just because you're showing up, you're checking in, you're sharing a little bit, you're glimpsing. A lot of people who, in the course of the pandemic, have moved back to out of the big cities to the towns that they're from, have told me that, ever since I've left the city, I love being back home with my family in my small town, but I miss some of the kinds of workshops and conversations and events that were available to me in the city. And now, suddenly, through these communities, I can get a sense of how people are thinking, what's going on. I have somebody who logs in from Berlin. So it's just really interesting for how people are able to connect in a way that was not imaginable 2 years ago. Still learning about it, but it's really exciting to see what it's enabling.
Great. I think especially the community part, I think Sechi's and what you're
Right.
aiming for, there is a lot
Yeah.
of synergy
Yes.
because two things, again, our ethos is also cohort-based
Right.
learning, which is
Right.
there, which, chances of completion are higher. So we are also
Right.
launching a similar program. And of course, this entire app is built for this purpose. So we plan to have clubs here and,
Right.
people really connecting with each other.
Right.
So I think all in all, very, very interesting mix of things that you're doing. And I
Thank you.
personally will definitely be in touch with you
Thank you. I would love
for the
that.
writing workshop for sure.
That sounds lovely.
Anyway, thank you so much for
Okay.
coming on our platform.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
inviting me. Okay. See you.